The forgetting was the point. For centuries, humanity had curated its own history with the meticulous care of a gardener tending a prize rose, pruning away the thorny, inconvenient truths and leaving only the sanitized narrative of steady, peaceful progress. Elias Thorne was one of the gardeners. He was a senior archivist at the Global Strategic Library, a digital Alexandria nestled deep beneath the permafrost of Svalbard, where the sum of human knowledge was etched onto silicon wafers and stored at temperatures that would outlast the sun. His world was one of climate-controlled silence, the gentle hum of servers, and the cold, clean light of data. He dealt in facts, in timelines scrubbed of ambiguity, in a history that flowed as smoothly as a river, devoid of the jagged rocks and hidden currents of what was lost. His own life mirrored his work, a quiet, ordered existence built around the memory of his wife, a memory he polished daily until it shone, all its painful edges worn smooth. He preferred the clean certainty of the past to the messy chaos of the present. But the past, the real past, was not clean, and it was beginning to bleed through. It started as a headache, a low thrum behind the eyes that prescription filters and augmented reality overlays couldn't soothe. Then came the whispers, phantom sounds at the edge of hearing that weren't on any audio log, the crackle of energy. A guttural word in a language that felt like it was coded into his DNA. Elias dismissed it as stress, the price of spending 16 hours a day communing with dead data in the Arctic dark. But then came the visions. One moment he was cataloging the socio-economic impacts of the Martian Accords. The next he was standing on a field of black, glassy sand under a sky the color of a fresh bruise. The air tasted of ozone and blood. A colossal, insectoid creature, all chitinous plates and razor-sharp limbs, screeched as it fell, brought down by a lance of pure, white-hot energy. He could feel the phantom weight of armor on his own shoulders, the familiar heat of a weapon in his hands, and a surge of triumphant, savage rage that was utterly alien to his quiet, contemplative nature. He gasped, stumbling back against a server rack in the archive. The sterile chill of the room, a shocking contrast to the burning battlefield in his mind. The vision vanished, leaving him trembling, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was the first time he'd experienced what the media, in their frantic attempts to label the growing global phenomenon, had started calling the bleed. All over the world, people were breaking. A bus driver in Neo-Kyoto suddenly swerved into a river, later telling authorities he was dodging incoming fire from a ship that wasn't there. A concert violinist in Prague stopped mid-concerto, her eyes wide with a terror no one else could see, screaming about a sky-cleaving blade. They were the echoes, a scattered few at first, then a growing tide. Governments scrambled to contain the narrative. It was a new form of schizophrenia, a mass psychogenic illness triggered by environmental toxins, a side effect of neural link technology. The official story changed every week, but the underlying message was always the same. These people were broken, their minds were sick, and they were to be pitied, medicated, and isolated. But Elias, a man who curated official stories for a living, knew the smell of a lie. After his second bleed, a terrifyingly vivid memory of being sealed inside a metal cryopod as klaxons blared a warning of imminent orbital collapse, he began to dig. He moved with the silent, ghost-like efficiency that had defined his career. He didn't hack mainframes. He simply walked through the digital corridors he knew better than anyone, accessing data streams that were dormant, forgotten, or deemed irrelevant. He looked for gaps, for inconsistencies, for the digital ghosts of expunged records. He found them everywhere. Historical archives that jumped centuries with no connecting data, geological surveys of impossible geologic formations, like mountains of melted steel or oceans boiled away to crystalline plains, all flagged with a data-corrupted tag that was too clean, too uniform. He cross-referenced linguistic databases and found fragments of the guttural language from his visions, classified as a failed proto-language with no known origin, yet it appeared in isolated pockets across every continent. The official history was a pristine white wall, but Elias was now close enough to see it was just a thin coat of paint over a mural of fire and war. His search led him to the darknet, to encrypted forums where other echoes gathered in secret, sharing their fragmented memories and desperately trying to piece them together. They were a new kind of veteran, haunted by a war they had never fought. It was there he found her. Her handle was Cassandra, and she didn't speak with the panicked confusion of the others. Her words were sharp, clinical, and filled with a cold, simmering fury. She was a former combat surgeon, and she analyzed the bleed not as a psychic phenomenon, but as a symptom of a dormant genetic trigger. "This isn't madness," she wrote in a post that sent a jolt through Elias. "It's a failsafe, a weaponized memory bank embedded in our DNA. And something is trying to turn it back on. They buried our past for a reason. They were afraid of what we were." Elias reached out to her, sharing the linguistic fragments he'd found. Her reply was almost instantaneous and chillingly direct. "Those aren't words. They're combat designations, unit markers, kill orders. My bleeds are mostly medical field surgery on bodies that aren't fully human, bio-enhancements that failed under stress. But you're seeing strategy. You're seeing the battlefield." She told him of a recurring phrase in her own bleeds, a protocol name that felt like a final, desperate command, the Warden Protocol. A quarantine, not to keep something out, but to keep something in. To keep humanity itself locked inside a cage of forgotten history, stripped of its fangs and claws. Cassandra believed the visions weren't random. They were pieces of a puzzle, a history shattered and scattered into the bloodlines of its descendants. She believed Elias's visions, with their clarity of place, the bruised sky, the black sand, were different. They were a map. "You're not just remembering the war," she typed, the words appearing on his secure terminal like a death sentence. "You're remembering where it was fought." She gave him a set of coordinates, a location in the desolate, windswept expanse of the Patagonian desert, and a simple instruction: "Come here. Others are coming. The signal is getting stronger, and so are the hunters." He almost refused. This was madness. He was an archivist, a man of quiet rooms and silent data. But as he logged off, another bleed hit him, harder than ever before. He was in the cockpit of a ship, a sleek, dagger-like craft, his hands gripping controls that felt like extensions of his own nerves. An alarm screamed in his mind, not through speakers, but as a psychic shockwave and a massive, shadowy vessel blotted out the stars ahead. He felt a surge of cold, defiant resolve as he pushed the ship into a dive. His target not the vessel itself, but the shimmering, reality-bending field behind it. A gate. He had to close the gate. The vision shattered, and Elias found himself on his knees in his sterile apartment. The polished chrome reflecting a face he barely recognized, a face contorted with a warrior's snarl. He looked at his hands, half expecting to see them scarred and calloused. The hunters Cassandra mentioned were no longer an abstract threat. He could feel them. The perfectly manicured garden of human history had a security system, and he had just tripped the silent alarm. He booked a one-way ticket to Patagonia, carrying nothing but a change of clothes and the ghost of a war that threatened to consume him whole. The forgetting was over. The remembering was about to begin. The air in Patagonia tasted of grit and distance. It was a raw, unfinished corner of the world, where the wind scoured the land down to its bones, and the silence was so profound it felt like a presence. Elias Thorne, a man who had spent his life in the hermetically sealed quiet of archives, found this new silence deafening. The coordinates Cassandra had given him led to a ghost town, a collection of sun-bleached shacks and rusted-out mining equipment that had been surrendering to the elements for over a century. It was the perfect place to hide, or to die. He waited for 2 days, the solitude gnawing at him. His only company the increasingly frequent bleeds that flickered at the edge of his vision. He saw star charts that weren't of Earth's sky and felt the phantom thrum of an engine that responded to emotion, not fuel. The visions were becoming less like memories and more like instincts, a layer of predatory awareness settling over his academic caution. On the 3rd day, they started to arrive. The first was a woman who moved with the weary purpose of a field medic walking toward a fresh wave of casualties. She had short and dark hair threaded with gray and eyes that seemed to be analyzing his structural weaknesses. "Thorne," she stated. Not a question. It was Cassandra. In person, she was smaller than he'd imagined, but her presence was a razor wire. Taut and dangerous. She carried a medical pack that looked overstuffed and a kinetic pistol holstered on her thigh with practiced ease. "Your bleeds," she said, skipping introductions. "You're seeing command-level data. Strategy. Navigation. The rest of us are grunts, mechanics, medics. We have the pieces. You have the map that shows how they fit together." Before Elias could process this, a second figure crested the nearby ridge. He was huge, a mountain of muscle and scars with a wild, untamed look in his eyes. He moved with a heavy, deliberate gait, his knuckles bruised and swollen. He nodded once at Cassandra, his gaze lingering on Elias with undisguised suspicion. "Kyle," Cassandra supplied. "His bleeds are loud, mostly close-quarters combat. He remembers how to break things. People, ships, fortifications." Kyle grunted, the sound like rocks grinding together, and began to patrol the perimeter of the ghost town, his body a coiled spring of violent potential. The last to arrive was a young woman named Lena, a former network engineer with wide, haunted eyes, who seemed perpetually distracted. She clutched a modified data pad, her fingers constantly tracing patterns on its dark surface. "She sees the machines," Cassandra explained in a low voice as Lena set up a portable sensor array. "Not just how they work, but how they were built. Her bleeds are all schematics and energy frequencies. She says they sing to her." Elias watched the trio, a broken collection of strangers united only by the ghosts in their blood. A medic, a brute, a technician, and an archivist. It felt less like a nascent rebellion and more like the setup for a grim joke. But as they gathered in the shell of an old saloon and began to talk, to share the fragmented nightmares that haunted their waking hours, A terrifying picture began to emerge. Kyle spoke of fighting alongside soldiers in powered armor against swarms of metallic arachnids. Lena described weaving light into solid matter to forge the hulls of the dagger ships from Elias's own visions. Cassandra remembered trying to mend flesh that was fused with crystalline circuitry. They were all soldiers of a forgotten war, their memories jigsaw pieces of a single, epic trauma. This location wasn't random, Lena said, her eyes fixed on her datapad. The background energy here is wrong. It's structured. There's something buried under us. Something deep. It's dormant, but it's listening. It was Elias who found it. His latest bleed wasn't a memory of war, but of escape. He saw a small team of engineers people who looked like Lena burying a device, a beacon, encoding it with a genetic key before being incinerated by an orbital strike that boiled the very rock around them. When the vision faded, the taste of ash in his mouth. He knew where to look. He led them a mile out from the town, to a place where the earth was unnaturally flat and the rock formations were twisted into shapes that defied erosion. "Here," he said, his voice hoarse. Kale, needing no further instruction, began to dig with his bare hands, tearing at the compacted earth with a strength that wasn't entirely human. Hours later, his fingers scraped against something smooth and cold. It was a hatch, seamless and black, made of a material that seemed to drink the light. There were no controls, no handles, only a single, hand-shaped indentation at its center. A genetic lock. Cassandra breathed, her clinical composure finally cracking with a sliver of awe. It's been waiting for a descendant. They all looked at Elias. His bleeds were the clearest, the most complete. He was the archivist, the keeper of the map. With a deep breath that did nothing to calm the storm in his chest, he knelt and placed his palm against the indentation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low hum vibrated up his arm, a resonant frequency that he felt in his bones. The hatch didn't slide open. It dissolved into a cascade of soft, blue light, revealing a spiral staircase descending into the earth. As the light from the entrance washed over them, a new, shared memory bloomed in their minds. A single sessy, clear thought that was not their own. The relay is awake. The children have returned. The air inside was cold and sterile, smelling of ozone and time. It led them down into a vast spherical chamber. At its center, suspended in a web of silent energy, was a crystalline spire that pulsed with a slow, steady heartbeat of light. Schematics and star charts flickered across its surface, a library of ghosts. They had found their nexus, the source of the signal that was awakening them. But they had also been found. As Lena approached the central spire, her face wrapped with a kind of holy reverence, Cassandra's head snapped up. "Contact," she hissed, drawing her pistol. "Perimeter. 4 of them." Kale was already moving, melting into the shadows of the entrance tunnel like a predator. Elias's heart seized. The hunters. The silencers. His mind was instantly flooded with a tactical overlay of the surface, showing him the attackers' positions as 4 red icons moving in a flawless, coordinated pattern. They weren't soldiers. They were scalpels, precise and deadly. "They're flanking the entrance," Elias called out, the strategic language flowing from him as if he'd spoken it his entire life. "They're trying to box us in." A burst of high-energy fire erupted from above, vaporizing the rock where Elias had been standing a second before. He had moved without thinking, his body reacting to the tactical data in his head. The fight was a chaotic nightmare. The attackers were human, dressed in sleek, gray fatigues with no insignia, their faces hidden by mirrored helmets. They moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency, armed with weapons that fired bolts of compressed sonic energy designed to incapacitate, not kill. They were here to enforce the forgetting. Kyle met the first one in the tunnel. It was a brutal, primal collision. The silencer was fast, its movements calculated, but Kyle was a storm of pure rage. His bleed was upon him, and he fought with the memory of 1,000 last stands, his fists striking with enough force to dent the attacker's advanced body armor. On the surface, Cassandra and Lena provided covering fire. Cassandra was a blur of motion, her shots precise, aimed at weapon joints and helmet sensors. She was a surgeon dissecting an enemy. Lena, however, was a revelation. As a silencer rounded on her, she threw her hands up, not in surrender, but in instinct, a wave of shimmering, translucent energy. A fragment of the relay's power erupted from her palms, slamming into the attacker and sending him flying. She stared at her hands, her expression a mixture of terror and wonder. She didn't just understand the machines, she was a part of them. Elias stayed at the entrance to the chamber, his mind a whirlwind of battlefield data. He was the fire control, the eye in the sky. Cassandra, 30 degrees to your left. High ground Kyle. He's reinforcing his partner. Break contact now. He was a general fighting a war with 3 soldiers. A war he had only ever seen in flashes of memory. But the silencers were relentless. They adapted, their tactics shifting to counter the Echo's raw power. They managed to wound Kyle, a sonic blast catching him in the leg, and cornered Cassandra behind a crumbling rock formation. They were being surgically dismantled. "We can't win this." Cassandra's voice crackled over their comms, strained with effort. "They're trying to disable, not kill. They want to take us alive." A cold dread washed over Elias. He remembered the forums, the whispers of what happened to Echoes who were caught. They didn't go to prison. They went to recalibration centers. They came back empty, their minds wiped clean, the ghosts in their blood exorcised. They were made to forget again. "No," Elias said, his voice a low growl. He turned and looked at the pulsating crystal spire in the center of the relay chamber. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have Kale's strength or Cassandra's skill. He had the map. He had the memories of the men who built this place, who designed its protocols. He ran toward the spire, the silencers ignoring him, focusing on the immediate threats. He placed both hands on its crystalline surface, and instead of trying to understand it, he simply let go. He poured all his fear, his confusion, and the burning rage from the battlefield of his bleeds into the crystal. He gave it the memory of the dagger ship, the dying star, the closing gate. He gave it a single, desperate command that echoed through 100 generations of dormant DNA. "Wake up, all of you. Wake up now." The relay responded. The gentle, rhythmic pulse of the spire became a frantic, blinding strobe. The low hum rose to a deafening shriek of pure energy that tore through the chamber and erupted from the ground, a pillar of incandescent blue light shooting into the Patagonian sky. On the surface, the silencers froze, their helmets turning toward the beacon. Their mission had changed from containment to damage control, but it was too late. The signal, amplified 1,000-fold, washed over the planet. It was not a whisper anymore. It was a roar, a declaration, in cities and towns, in quiet homes and crowded streets across the globe. Thousands of people collapsed, their minds suddenly flooded with the memories of a forgotten war. The echoes were no longer a scattered few, they were an army. And Elias Thorne had just sounded the call to arms. The pillar of blue light that had torn a hole in the Patagonian sky collapsed in on itself, the shriek of the relay's activation signal fading back into a resonant hum that now seemed to beat in time with their own hearts. For a moment, a stunned silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the wind and the harsh static of a damaged comlink. The four silencers, who had been moving with the fluid grace of apex predators, were now frozen, their mirrored helmets turned toward the place where the beacon had been. Their mission of quiet containment had catastrophically failed. A new directive, cold and absolute, filtered into their tactical network from an unseen orbital command sanitized the source. Eradicate the primary vectors. The Warden Protocol is now at Contingency Omega. No witnesses. The subtle shift was terrifying. The sonic pulses of their weapons were replaced by a sharp, whining charge. The air grew hot. Their objective was no longer capture, it was annihilation. "They're switching to lethal ordnance," Cassandra yelled, shoving Lena toward the dark maw of the relay's entrance. "Elias, Kyle, get down here now." A bolt of white-hot plasma screamed past her head, turning a massive boulder into molten slag. The surgical precision was gone, replaced by overwhelming force. Kyle, bleeding from the gash in his leg but moving with a fresh surge of adrenaline, grabbed Elias and half threw him down the spiral staircase before turning to face the tunnel. "Go, I'll hold the door," he roared, the promise of a glorious, bloody last stand burning in his eyes. But Lena stopped at the bottom of the stairs, her hands pressed against the cool, dark wall of the relay chamber. "No," she whispered, her eyes glowing with a soft, internal light. "It won't let them. It's protective." As the first silencer entered the tunnel, weapon raised, the walls themselves seemed to respond. Veins of blue energy, identical to the light of the central spire, shot through the rock. The silencer was caught in the web of light, his body convulsing as the energy didn't burn him, but simply unmade him. His armor, his weapon, his body dissolved into a cloud of shimmering particles that were absorbed back into the chamber walls. A second silencer tried to fire from a distance, but the tunnel entrance folded in on itself, stone flowing like water to seal the chamber shut, plunging them into absolute darkness. A moment later, the central spire pulsed, filling the vast sphere with a soft, ambient glow. They were safe. They were also trapped. "What did you do?" Elias asked, his voice echoing in the sudden stillness. Lena shook her head, looking at her hands in disbelief. "I didn't do anything. I just asked it to protect us. It knows us. It feels like home." While Kale's wound was being tended to by Cassandra, who pulled advanced cauterizing tools and biofoam from her pack that were decades ahead of current technology, Elias felt a different kind of connection to the relay. He wasn't a conduit like Lena. He was a user. He walked to the spire, and as he drew close, a section of its crystalline face went dark, then reformed into a three-dimensional, real-time map of the planet. The view was horrifying. Hundreds, then thousands, of new lights were blinking into existence across the globe, each one a newly awakened echo, but they were being answered by a creeping network of red, the activation of the Warden Protocol. Military forces worldwide, under a unified shadow command, were moving to contain the outbreak. News feeds, which Lena managed to pull from the relay's FTL comms array, showed chaotic scenes from every major city, people staring at the sky with dawning recognition, others screaming as memories of ancient violence flooded their minds. They were being rounded up, branded as terrorists or victims of a new plague. The official story was holding, just barely, because the alternative that humanity was a genetically weaponized species remembering a galactic war was too insane to contemplate. "They're not just hunting us," Cassandra said grimly. "Looking at the global map. They're culling us before we can even figure out what we are. They were an army without a general, a rebellion without a plan. But they had an archivist." Elias studied the map, the tactical data from his bleeds overlaying the real-world information. He saw patterns the Wardens were missing, safe zones in the chaos, and lines of communication they could exploit. "The Wardens are reacting, not planning," he said, his voice gaining a new, hard-edged authority. "They were designed to maintain the quarantine, not fight a war. They're strong, but they're inflexible. We can use that." He pointed to a blinking light, isolated but strong, near a derelict airfield not 50 miles from their position. "We need to get out of here. We need to move, to gather the others. That light, his bleed feels familiar. It feels like flight." Getting out was the problem. The relay had protected them by sealing them in. Lena, however, was in her element. She interfaced with the Spire again, not with commands, but with intent. She showed it their need to escape, their mission to unite the others. The relay responded. A section of the chamber wall dissolved, not into a tunnel, but into a shimmering portal of light. "It's a transport node," Lena whispered in awe. "Part of a network. It says this one leads to a service conduit a few clicks away. It's the best it can do." They stepped through the portal and found themselves in a cramped, dark maintenance tunnel that smelled of dust and dormant power. The portal snapped shut behind them, the comforting hum of the relay gone. They were on their own again. They made their way to the airfield under the cover of a moonless night. It was a graveyard of rusted crop dusters and cargo planes. In the center of the field stood a man, his head tilted to the sky as if listening to a distant song. He was wiry, with oil-stained hands and a reckless grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Took you long enough," he said, without turning around. "The old girl's been whispering to me for an hour. Told me she was about to get some passengers." His name was Jax, and his bleeds were of piloting the sleek, black dagger ships through asteroid fields and nebulae. He had spent the last 2 hours lovingly coaxing the engine of a C-130 Hercules, a plane he called the Albatross, back to life. He wasn't just a pilot. He was a savant, his hands moving over the ancient controls with the remembered grace of a forgotten technology. They had just managed to get the groaning engines to turn over when the sky lit up. A Warden stealth craft, a matte black triangle that seemed to cut a hole in the stars, descended upon them, its weapon ports glowing. "They found us," Cassandra snapped, pulling Kyle toward the cargo ramp. "Jax, get us out of here." The albatross was a lumbering beast compared to the Warden craft's lethal elegance. Plasma fire stitched the runway around them as Jax pushed the throttle, the old plane shuddering down the tarmac. "She ain't fast, and she ain't pretty," Jax yelled over the roar of the engines. "But she's tough." They lifted off, just as the runway behind them was turned into a trench of molten glass. The chase was on. The Warden craft was faster, more maneuverable, and armed to the teeth. It clung to their tail, its targeting lasers painting their fuselage. "I can't shake him," Jax grunted, wrestling with the controls. "He's got a lock." Elias closed his eyes, ignoring the chaos of the cockpit. He let the bleed take him, seeing not the lumbering cargo plane, but the dagger ship of his memories. He saw the Warden's attack vectors not as light, but as lines of probability. He was the battle computer. "Hard port in 3, 2, 1. Now," he commanded. Jax obeyed instantly, yanking the yoke. The albatross groaned in protest as it banked sharply, a volley of plasma fire screaming past where they had just been. "He's overshooting to reacquire dive, push the nose down." Now, again, Jax followed the command without question. They plunged toward the jagged peaks of the Andes, the Warden craft in hot pursuit. Elias was no longer Elias Thorne, archivist. He was commander, his mind a nexus of instinct and data, calling out impossible maneuvers that somehow kept them alive. Lena, strapped into the co-pilot seat, had her hands pressed against the dashboard. Blue energy flickered from her fingertips into the plane's avionics. "The engines are responding," she said, her voice strained. "I can feel them. I can push them harder." With a surge of her will, the old engines roared with new life, their output flaring far beyond their design specifications. For a precious few seconds, they actually outran the Warden's targeting solution. Their destination was the coast. "Get us over the water," Elias ordered, his mind racing. Low as you can go. They skimmed the waves, the salt spray misting the cockpit windows. The Warden craft hesitated, its sensors likely struggling to differentiate their heat signature from the ocean's surface. It was the opening they needed. "He's going to do a wide scan sweep," Elias said, anticipating the enemy's next move. "Jax, when I give the word, cut the engines and drop. Lena, be ready to restart them on my mark." It was a crazy, suicidal maneuver. "You're insane." Jax laughed, a wild, joyful light in his eyes. "I like it." "Now," Elias yelled. Jax cut the power. The roar of the engines died, replaced by the terrifying whistle of the wind. The albatross, a multi-ton metal bird, fell out of the sky like a stone. For 5 heart-stopping seconds, they plunged toward the black water. The Warden craft, its scan finding nothing, began to bank away. "Lena." "Now," Elias screamed. Lena slammed her hands on the console, a wave of raw power surging into the dead engines. They sputtered, caught, and roared back to life with a violent shudder, pulling the plane out of its dive mere feet from the waves. They had done it. They had vanished. They leveled out, flying low and fast into the Pacific night, leaving their hunter circling an empty patch of ocean behind them. They were alive. They were free. And for the first time, they weren't running from something. They were flying toward a new destination, a place of sanctuary Elias had seen in his bleeds, a forgotten bastion from the ancient war hidden deep beneath the waves. They were no longer just echoes of the past. They were the architects of the future, and their war had just begun. The Albatross flew for 18 hours, a wounded ghost skimming the surface of the Pacific. Lena, pale and sweating, kept her hands on the dashboard, her connection to the plane's sputtering engines the only thing keeping them airborne. The energy it took was draining her, but she held on, her jaw set with a grim determination that was new to her. Kale, patched up by Cassandra, sat by the cargo door, his massive frame radiating a tense silence as he stared out at the endless blue horizon, hunting for threats. Cassandra, meanwhile, moved with a restless energy, stripping down and reassembling her pistol, checking their meager supplies, her mind clearly working through casualty scenarios and triage protocols. They were a raw, frayed nerve of a team, running on adrenaline and the dawning, terrifying clarity of their new reality. Elias, however, was the calm at the center of their storm. The flight was giving him time to let the bleed settle, to sift through the chaotic flood of ancestral memories and extract actionable intelligence. He sat with his eyes closed, the real-time tactical data that had saved them in the Andes receding, replaced by a deeper, older layer of memory. He wasn't seeing battles now. He was seeing a civilization, a humanity that had reached for the stars not with hopeful curiosity, but with the grim determination of a species that knew the darkness that lurked between them. He saw cities of glowing spires built into the canyons of Mars, shipyards in the rings of Saturn that constructed fleets of the dagger ships, and listening posts on Titan that watched for incursions from a place he understood only as the outside. This wasn't a lost chapter of history, it was an entirely different book. The Warden Protocol hadn't just made humanity forget a war, it had made them forget an entire stellar empire. It had reset them, caging them on their homeworld and convincing them they had never left. Their destination was a ghost from that fallen empire, a name that echoed in his mind with the weight of a final sanctuary, Rift Shard. According to the Bleed, it was a deep ocean research and command facility, built around a geothermal vent, and shielded from orbital scans by both the sea and a layer of dormant reality-bending technology. It was their only hope for a base, a place to regroup and understand the weapon that had been sleeping in their genes. "We're close," Elias announced, his eyes snapping open. Jax, fighting exhaustion, nodded and pointed to the avionics. "Sensors are going haywire. Something down there is playing hell with our systems." As they flew over the coordinates pulled from Elias's memory, a section of the ocean below began to churn. A whirlpool of impossible size formed, the water glowing with the familiar blue light of relay technology. "You have got to be kidding me," Jax breathed, gripping the controls. "That's our landing strip." The Albatross groaned as the vortex pulled them in, the plane spiraling down into the glowing heart of the sea. They were not submerged, but encased in a bubble of energized air that held the ocean at bay, descending through a tunnel of swirling water into the crushing darkness of the abyss. Then they saw it. Riftguard was a breathtaking sight, a city of interconnected bioluminescent domes and spires anchored to the seabed, glowing like a cluster of captured stars in the eternal night. Automated drones, shaped like manta rays, emerged from docking bays to guide their lumbering plane toward a massive, pressurized hangar. The moment the Albatross touched down, its engines gave a final, wheezing gasp and died. They had made it. The air inside was cool and tasted faintly of brine and recycled oxygen. The station was on standby, its systems humming with a low, latent power. As the 5 of them stepped onto the hangar deck, the station's lights brightened in sequence. A silent, automated welcome. A soft, androgynous voice echoed through the cavernous space. Welcome, descendants. Biometric and genetic signatures confirmed. Rift Guard is active. Command authority is transferred to Archivist designation Elias Thorne. Elias froze. The others stared at him, a mixture of shock and suspicion on their faces. Command authority, Kyle growled, his hand resting on a heavy wrench he'd picked up. Since when are you in charge? I'm not, Elias said, looking around at the impossibly advanced technology. He is. The one I remember being the title. It's a part of the bleed. I think I was one of the people who gave the order to build this place. It was a staggering thought, a weight of responsibility that settled on him like a physical cloak. He was not just remembering a soldier, he was remembering a leader from a civilization that had fought and lost a war on a scale he could barely comprehend. Rift Guard was more than a base. It was an ark. It contained fabrication bays capable of building weapons and armor from raw materials, advanced medical suites that made Cassandra's future tech medkit look like a child's toy, and a central command center that gave them a real-time view of the global situation. The picture it painted was bleak. The Warden Protocol was in full effect, the initial chaos of the Great Awakening, as the media had dubbed the event, had subsided. Now came the methodical, thus terrifyingly efficient purge. Echoes were being hunted down with ruthless precision. The Wardens had deployed new assets hunters in advanced exoskeletons, nicknamed Phantoms by the nascent resistance, who could track echoes by their unique bioenergetic signature. The rebellion was scattered, leaderless, and being bled dry. They were losing. We can't win like this, Cassandra said, her voice flat as she analyzed the tactical display. We're fighting a global or coordinated force with a handful of terrified, disorganized cells. They're picking us off one by one. Then we have to change the equation, Elias replied, his mind already sifting through the strategic archives of Rift Guard. The station wasn't just a fortress, it was a sword. Within its memory banks were the schematics for the dagger ships, the stilettos, as they were designated, and the plans for the energy lances and powered armor. Kyle remembered. They had the means to arm the rebellion. Lena, can you get the fabricators online? Elias asked. She nodded, already mesmerized by the station's core systems. Jax, I need you to learn how to fly a ship that doesn't have propellers. Jax's reckless grin returned. Best damn order I've ever received. Kyle, Elias continued, turning to the big man. Your bleeds, they're not just about fighting. They're about training. I need you to codify it, to create a combat doctrine we can transmit to the other echoes. Teach them how to survive. Kyle looked at Elias, his suspicion replaced by a grudging respect. He gave a single, sharp nod. And Cassandra. Elias finished. We need to understand our own biology. This awakening. It's more than memory. It's changing us. I need to know how. I need to know what we're capable of. As they began their impossible task, Elias delved deeper into the station's command archives and into the memories of the man he had been. He learned the enemy had a name, the Architects. They were not a species, but a Gestalt intelligence, a collective that saw emergent, chaotic civilizations like humanity's as a virus in the cosmic order. Their goal was not conquest, but correction, a sterile, passionless pruning of the universe. The Warden Protocol was their ultimate tool of control, a cage built around an entire species. But as he explored the final logs of his predecessor, he found a last, desperate gamble. A contingency plan codenamed Project Chimera. It wasn't a weapon or a ship. It was a person. A single, engineered echo, created before the fall, who possessed the memories of not one soldier, but of the entire command structure, a living nexus of strategic and genetic knowledge, hidden in cryostasis somewhere on Earth, waiting for the relay to send the wake-up call. The key to turning the tide wasn't just arming the echoes. It was finding their general. He had just uncovered the first clue to the Chimera's location, a cryptic reference to the city that drowned in fire when the alarms blared. A red alert flashed on the main screen, warning sub-oceanic breach detected. Warden Deep Dive Assault Unit approaching. They had been found, far faster than he had anticipated. On the view screen, they saw them 6 sleek, shark-like submersibles moving with unnatural speed, closing on Rift Guard. "They're not trying to breach the hull," Lena said, her voice tight with fear as she read the energy signatures. "They're deploying something, a resonance weapon. They're going to shake us apart." Panic flared in the command center. They were trapped, thousands of feet beneath the ocean, with an enemy at their door and no way to fight back. The stiletto fabricators were still dormant, the station's external defenses offline. But Elias didn't look at the tactical display. He looked at Jax. "Get to the hangar," he said, his voice cold and steady. "But we don't have any ships," Jax protested. "We have one," Elias replied, a flicker of his predecessor's defiant resolve in his eyes. "A very old, very stubborn one." He turned to the station's AI. "Rift Guard, open the main hangar doors, and prepare the Albatross for an underwater launch." The Albatross screamed as the ocean swallowed it whole. The immense pressure of the deep should have crushed its frame into a tin can in seconds. But a shimmering blue bubble of energy, an extension of Lena's will projected through Rift Guard systems, clung to its fuselage like a second skin. Inside the cockpit, alarms blared a symphony of mechanical panic. Jax wrestled with the controls, his knuckles white, but he wasn't flying a plane anymore. He was piloting a submersible with the aerodynamics of a brick. "She's fighting me," he yelled, the joy gone from his voice, replaced by the raw thrill of survival. "The currents are tearing us apart." The 6 Warden submersibles, caught off guard by the suicidal maneuver, converged on their position, their sleek frames cutting through the water like torpedoes. They fired again, not with plasma, but with concussive charges that sent shockwaves through the water, rattling the Albatross and threatening to shatter Lena's fragile shield. "I can't hold it," she cried out, blood trickling from her nose from the sheer strain. "The impacts are too much." Elias, strapped into the navigator seat, had his eyes closed. He wasn't in the plane. He was outside, his consciousness mapping the abyssal plane, feeling the currents, and seeing the attack vectors of the Warden subs. He was the fire control for a weapon that didn't exist. "They're hurting us," he said, his voice eerily calm amidst the chaos. "They expect us to surface. We're going to do the opposite. Jax, aim for the geothermal vent, the one Rift Guard is anchored to." Jax stared at him as if he were insane. "That's a volcanic fissure. The heat and pressure will vaporize us. The shield will hold for a few seconds," Elias countered, his eyes still closed. Their sensors won't be able to penetrate the thermal interference. It's our only way to break contact." It was a choice between a quick death and a certain one, with a curse that was half prayer. Jax pushed the nose down. The albatross plunged into the superheated plume of the vent. For 3 agonizing seconds, the world outside the cockpit was a maelstrom of boiling water and volcanic gas. Lena screamed as her shield flared white-hot, threatening to collapse. Then, just as suddenly, they were through, shooting out the other side into the cold. Black water. They were alone. The Warden subs, their sensors blinded, circled the vent, searching for wreckage that didn't exist. Their battered plane, kept alive by Lena's fading strength, limped toward the surface and broke through the waves into the gray light of dawn. They were alive, but their sanctuary was lost. Rift Guard, knowing its location was compromised, had already initiated a deep-level lockdown, its signal vanishing from the network. They were cut off. All they had was the clue from Elias's bleed, the city that drowned in fire. As Jax nursed the albatross eastward, Elias, the archivist, pieced it together. It wasn't a historical reference to Pompeii or Atlantis. It was a memory from their history. He saw a sprawling metropolis on the shores of a great lake, a city of silver towers that fell not to flame, but to the clean, scouring fire of an orbital energy weapon. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 wasn't the original event. It was a historical echo, a scar on the collective unconscious left by a far greater cataclysm. The Chimera was buried deep beneath the modern city of Chicago. As they flew, they saw the grim reality of the Warden's control. The skies were empty of commercial traffic, replaced by the silent, triangular shapes of patrol craft. The war was already over for most people. It had been contained, explained away. Only the echoes knew the truth, and they were being systematically extinguished. They landed the albatross in a desolate boneyard of rusted trains and collapsed warehouses on the outskirts of the city, ditching the plane that had saved their lives. The energy signature of the awakening Chimera was a faint but steady pulse, drawing them into the city's concrete heart. The Wardens were already there. Phantom squads patrolled the streets, their movements silent and fluid, their faceless helmets scanning for the telltale energy of an echo. Getting to the epicenter was like walking through a minefield. It was Kale who guided them, his combat bleeds giving him a predator's sense of patrol routes and blind spots. He led them through forgotten subway tunnels and crumbling service corridors, a silent, hulking ghost in the urban decay. They finally reached their destination, a construction site where a new corporate arcology was being built. The Chimera's signal was coming from directly beneath it, from the deepest level of the foundation, where the new construction met the fused, glassy rock of the ancient impact crater. The final descent was a trap. As they entered the subterranean levels, containment fields snapped into place, and the chamber was flooded with phantoms. They were surrounded. "It was a lure," Cassandra hissed, dropping into a defensive crouch. "They knew we were coming." A figure stepped forward, different from the others. He wore no helmet. His face was pale and impassive, his eyes holding a cold, ancient intelligence. He was not a soldier. He was a warden himself, one of the architects of the quarantine. "Elias Thorne," the warden said, his voice calm, devoid of emotion. "The primary anomaly. Your ancestral memory is inconvenient. Surrender the asset, and your termination will be efficient." This was it. The final stand. Jax, Lena, get to the core, Elias commanded. Cassandra, Kyle, with me. We buy them time. The battle was short and brutal. Kyle was a force of nature, his rage given form, shattering the Phantom's armor with salvaged pipes and chunks of concrete. Cassandra moved like a phantom herself, her kinetic pistol barking as she disabled enemy weapons with surgical precision. But they were hopelessly outnumbered. Jax and Lena reached the center of the room, where a single obsidian sarcophagus rose from the floor, humming with dormant power. "I can't open it," Lena cried, her hands pressed against its surface. "The encryption is biological." Elias saw it then. The sarcophagus wasn't a cryopod, it was a throne. And the key wasn't a code, it was him. He fought his way to the center of the room, the warden's words echoing in his mind. Primary anomaly. Inconvenient memory. Project Chimera wasn't a person they had to find. It was a protocol that had to be unlocked. He was the Chimera. He threw himself onto the throne, and as his body made contact, his mind shattered. The last firewalls of the Warden protocol that had caged his consciousness for a lifetime collapsed. He wasn't Elias Thorne remembering a commander. He was the commander, a being of ancient strategy and cold fury who had been forced to remember the quiet, contemplative life of an archivist. The two halves of his soul, the warrior and the scholar, merged into a single, complete consciousness. He saw everything. He saw the Warden Network not as a military force, but as a program, a vast, interconnected system of control with a single, exploitable root command. He saw the architects, not as gods, but as frightened gardeners, terrified of a single wild flower. He stood up, his eyes glowing with the blue light of the relay. The Phantoms hesitated, their programming struggling to classify the new threat he represented. "You are an error in the system," the lead warden stated, raising his weapon. "And all errors must be corrected." Elias smiled, a cold, thin expression that was utterly alien on the archivist's face. "You are mistaken," he said, his voice a perfect fusion of quiet authority and absolute command. "I am the system administrator." He reached out, not with his hands, but with his mind, touching the global network of the Wardens through the throne's connection. He didn't send a virus or a surge of power. He sent a single, simple, irrevocable command, an edit to their most fundamental programming. He rewrote their prime directive. Across the planet, the war simply stopped. Phantom squads lowered their weapons, their targeting systems going dark. Warden patrol craft shifted their vectors, moving from hunting patterns to silent observation orbits. In recalibration centers, echoes were released, their captors stepping aside with a blank, newfound neutrality. The cage had not been broken, its door had been opened from the inside. The warden in front of them staggered, his impassive face contorted with confusion as his core programming fought itself. "The quarantine," he stammered. "The directive is to observe, to protect." He looked at Elias, a flicker of something like fear in his ancient eyes, before he and his remaining Phantoms turned and retreated in silent, ordered procession. The war was over. In the quiet aftermath, the five of them stood in the heart of the buried city, the architects of a new age. The forgetting was done. Now, the difficult, messy, and glorious work of remembering could begin. Elias Thorne, the archivist and the commander, looked at his team, the pilot, the engineer, the warrior, the surgeon, the first soldiers of a humanity that was finally whole again. They were scarred. They were tired. and they were free. He looked up, through tons of rock and steel, as if he could see the stars that were once theirs. The stars were waiting.